Hi, I'm Kurnow. For the past several months, I've been working on a project that I like to call Quilt Rescue. Well, I've heard from several people asking me, what exactly is a quilt rescue? Well, I think I got the idea from my local animal shelter. When they get an animal in and then someone adopts the animal, they call it an animal rescue. In the same way, I like to find a quilt top that's neglected and unused and unfinished, and I like to take it home and finish it. And I call that a quilt rescue. Well, what exactly is involved in a quilt rescue? Let me tell you about some of the steps that I go through. First of all, where do I even find these quilt tops? Well, usually I find them at secondhand stores or antique sales, yard sales, on Etsy or eBay or other places online. Sometimes it's just a set of blocks or an incomplete set of blocks. Sometimes it's an entire quilt top. Sometimes it's a not quite finished quilt top. I never really know what I'm getting. The pictures tend to be very small, and so there's sort of an air of mystery when I get them over the internet. When I can see them in person, I get a much better idea of what kind of workmanship has been done, how good of shape the fabrics are in, and those kinds of things. The first thing I like to do is to clean the quilt, because they usually arrive in rather dusty condition. I like to soak it in the bathtub with a little bit of laundry detergent and some OxyClean, and I've even been known to soak it 2 or 3 days, depending on the condition in which it arrives. At that time also I treat any stains that I see on the quilt, and hopefully I can get most of them out. I dry the quilt naturally. Before it's quite dry, I like to iron it flat. And as I'm ironing it, I go through very carefully and examine, are there long strings that need to be cut off? Are there holes in the quilt? Any places where the stitching has let loose? And then once I've got it in a basic clean condition, I measure it and try to decide, is it a good size for today's beds? Because many of the quilt tops are older and they're designed for smaller size beds than what we use today. So sometimes I'll try to find a similar fabric and add on a border that would go along with the fabrics that are in the quilt to make it more a queen size or king size for today's use. Now, some of the challenges that come with rescuing quilts are you just don't know what you're going to get. So one of the quilts is a beautiful double wedding ring quilt, but somebody already penciled in quilting lines with real pencil that you don't know if you're going to be able to get that out or if you'll be able to stitch over it in such a way that it hides the marks. One really beautiful light colored quilt top was sewn with purple thread, and I had to go through meticulously on the back and trim away all the purple threads because they might show through the white fabric later on. There's always some kind of a challenge. It could be that the stitching was done by hand, but the stitches are really large. Maybe there are puckers in the quilt. I just never know what I'm going to get, but that's part of the fun of it. And also, there's a great feeling of satisfaction after I get the quilt put together with a backing and batting, and I bind it all, and I put on a label that says where it came from, even though I don't know who the maker is. I like to give credit at least to the area of the country from which it came. And then I get to see someone enjoy this beautiful vintage quilt, and it might have just sat in a secondhand shop otherwise, but now someone's actually using it. Now, one thing I learned at our local animal shelter is sometimes people foster pets before they're actually adopted. So they take them into a family situation and they get them used to being around children and other pets and things like that. Well, sometimes they fall in love with the pets and they just can't let them go back to the shelter. And that's called a foster fail. Well, I've discovered that in quilt rescue there is also such a thing as a foster fail, because some of the quilt tops that I have gotten, I have just fallen in love with, and I haven't been able to let them go.